Just looking like a wow. Just looking like a wow.
We see participants joining the panel discussion. We will give some more minutes before we start. I think we can start. It's 4:03 now. So, good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to today's panel discussion. My name is Sharmishta, and I'm from the Azim Premji University. I'm joined by the faculty members who are the speakers for today's panel discussion. That is Aanchal, Shilpi, and Rishi. We also have Ronita faculty member of Azim Premji University, who will be moderating today's program. Before we start, few instructions. Would request all of you to be on mute while our speakers are in the discussion. We will also have a question and answer, open forum, wherein you can either raise your hand and we will take up your questions, or you can also post your questions in the chat box here. We will take them up. Also, for my friends who are viewing this discussion on YouTube, you can post in your questions in the chat box there. We will be also answering them. So with this, I would request Ronita to take it ahead. Over to you, Ronita.
Thanks, Sharmishta. So good evening, everyone. I welcome you all to the panel discussion on assessing what matters, decoding competency-based assessment. So as Sharmishta has already said, this session is for 1.5 hours. 1 hour, we will have the panel discussion, and the last half an hour, we will take your questions. So let me introduce to the panelists first. So we have Rishikesh. He's the Associate Director of the School of Education at Azim Premji University. The courses he offers for students in the MA educations are related to the introduction of school systems in India, school as an organization, and educational assessments. Over the last couple of years, education policy related issues have formed the core of Rishikesh's work. He is on various government advisory committees on issues concerning education. Our next panelist is Aanchal, and she is the faculty at the School of Continuing Education. Aanchal also leads the assessment team there. She teaches educational assessment in the MA education program. She has worked extensively across different states in India, designing and implementing frameworks, tools, and processes for student assessment, teacher evaluation, and assessment for measuring system efficacy. She has closely worked with CBSE and several state boards in improving the quality of board examination. We have Shilpi Banerjee. She is also a faculty in School of Continuing Education. She has a PhD in educational assessment from International Institute of Information Technology, Bangalore. She teaches educational assessment in MA education. Her research interests include assessment, design, and statistical evaluation of large-scale assessment data. She has also worked very closely with several school boards. And I am Ronita. I am a faculty in School of Continuing Education, and I will be a moderator today. So before we embark on the discussion today, let me take you back to 1910. It's very, very long time. And narrate an excerpt from Bade Bhai Sahab, one of Premchand's most notable short stories in 1910. So what is this story about? This story is about, in the first instant, it looks like a merry story about two brothers attending schools. And gradually, as we move on to the story, we find there are layers of it in education. So I will read 2 excerpts from Bade Bhai Sahab written by Premchand. So I begin. And study the history of Englistan. It is not easy to remember the names of the kings. There have been no less than 8 Henrys. Do you think it is easy to remember whether a certain event took place in the reign of this or that Henry? If you mistook Henry the 8th for the Henry the 7th, you could lose all the marks, absolutely. What do you think? There have been dozens of James, dozens of Williams, and any number of Charles. It is mind-boggling. These wretches couldn't think of new names. They kept fixing first, second, third, fifth after the same. If they had asked me, I would have suggested a million. And geometry? God alone save you from geometry. If you wrote ACB or ABC, you would lose all the marks. No one cares to ask these cruel examiners as to what is the difference between ACB and ABC and why they torture the student for these worthless things. How does it matter whether you eat dal bhat roti or bhat dal roti? But these examiners don't care. They see only what is written in the books. They want students to cram everything, word for word, and this cramming has been called education. So my first question to Rishi is, Rishi, how far have we come? A lot has been spoken recently about the need for change in the culture of assessment. Could you please elaborate on this in the light of current policy documents?
Thanks, Ronita. Good afternoon, everyone. I think, Ronita, you began very well. And as a history student, I also love going back to the past. It's very important for us to go to the past so that the context, is set well, uh, particularly in a domain such as education, because as we all know, change takes so much of time, right? Even, for instance, if you look at the right to education becoming a fundamental right, it's almost 100-year battle, because it is, in fact, in the same year that you read this excerpt from, in 1910, that Gopal Krishna Gokhale puts out a submission that we should have a right to free and compulsory education in India. And of course, this is a submission to the British government, since we are under their rule then. And then finally, we all know it's 2009 is when the act is passed in our parliament. So which means it was almost a 99-year-old fight. So similarly, with regard to assessments, we have come a long way, yes, from 1910, but we are still yet to go a long way in terms of also ensuring that we meet the kind of vision that, let's say, that is coming out from this poem, because we are still not there. And we still, unfortunately, don't even have all the stakeholders with us on that in terms of how should assessments be. So it's going to be a journey that we all will have to together move on to ensure that we move in the right direction. In fact, it was from the late 19th century that this whole fight against board exams being very stressful and hijacking the education process is mentioned in the historic documents. It was, in fact, Viceroy Curzon, while passing the University Act of 1904, that once again mentions about exams hijacking everything. So it's been something that people have identified from the very beginning, and people right at the top. But then when you look at what's happening at the ground level in the classrooms, one does feel that not much change is happening. In fact, in 1904, the phrase that was used is that there is an abuse of examinations. The sentence goes like, examinations, as now understood, are believed to have been an unknown instrument of general education in India. And because of what was done in England, it was brought in here, but then it finally has become or grown to extravagant dimensions, and their influence has been allowed to dominate the whole system of education. So it's kind of, taking over the entire system and ensuring that the system follows what is being planned for in the exams rather than the other way around. And this identification of exams, the way that they were modeled as being detrimental, continues all the way. Though in the 1913 education policy, the India education policy, there is a statement which says that the formerly crushing weight of examinations has been appreciably lightened. But then it doesn't really lighten, because when you move on, even 20 years later, when the Zakir Hussain committee is putting out a primary education model, they again talk about how the prevailing exams in the country have been a curse to education, right? So pre-independence also continuously highlighting that exams are not doing the kind of role that an assessment, a genuine assessment, should be doing. But still, every committee keeps identifying that things are not changing in spite of the previous recommendations. In fact, as soon as independence, we get independence, we have the Mudaliar Commission set up soon after the Higher Education Commission. Mudaliar Commission is looking at the secondary education space. And there again, they talk about as to how there should be more space for internal examinations, because the focus has been on board exams and, these high stakes, summative standardized exams. And so Mudaliar Commission says that, well, that's not really providing good assessment. Let there be more internal exams so that at least, the weight is lessened. And they also speak about the overall development of the child that needs to be assessed while a child is in school, which we all know is taken up in a much more emphatic way by the Kothari Commission, right? Who talk about, the entire continuous process should be part and parcel of assessment. So the continuous process of education should be part of assessment. And that is again repeated, in our 1986 policy. And then finally in 2005, when we get the curricular framework, which takes into account everything that has been said in the past and puts out a curricular framework and position papers on assessment, we once again hear about how we need to move away from these very high stakes board exams, which again, the poem that you read is indicating, and move into a competency-based, formative, modeled assessment, which would assess children in everything that they do as part of the education process. Right. So this journey, we've come a long way, that we today have not just NCF 2005, but then building on it, we now have the latest NCF 2023 as well, which continues to say that. I think the beauty is that now in NCF 2023, we also have certain steps. Right. So that's the journey, Ronita. For me, it's a journey where a lot has happened on paper. Some things have happened on the ground. We have now very beautiful examples of wonderful assessment practices, even from government schools in remote corners or private schools, some small private schools in urban centers. But if you ask me, in the mainstream, has even the 1904 vision for assessments taken place? Well, I would say we still have some way to go.
Thanks, Rishi. Thanks for taking us through the journey right from 1910 and very beautifully bringing in Gopal Krishna Gokhale. And he talks about right to education from there. And you also spoke about NEP 2020 and NCF 2023, where we have some terms, some concepts like competency-based assessment. So Aanchal, just taking it forward from Rishi, can you help us understand what is competency-based assessment as a concept? And it has gained a lot of attraction, of late. Could you help us unpacking the term competency-based assessments in some detail? Yeah.
Thank you, Ronita, and good afternoon to everybody once again. So I think Rishi has given us the context in which we are looking at education, and I think one thing that sort of runs through all the policies is the need for transforming the way we do assessments in our classrooms and make it a tool for learning. So when we talk about learning, we obviously want our children to learn competencies which will help them lead their lives in future in a much better way. So if you ask me to unpack the meaning of competency-based assessments, I think first and foremost, it's important to understand what do we mean by competencies, and particularly what do we mean by competencies for school education. When we look at curriculums across the globe, we see that some curriculums have taken a very broad approach to defining competencies, such as what would they like their students to learn at the end of 10, 12 years of schooling. Whereas there are a few other curriculums that take a very specific sort of an approach by specifying that what kind of competencies are expected of their learners at the end of a particular grade or a particular stage, or even across different school subjects. In light of the National Curriculum Framework for School Education, we see that the competencies are beautifully nested in the aims of education, and more specifically in the curricular aims and the curricular goals of different subjects that are taught through our schooling system. So if I take an example, competencies broadly defined could mean the ability to do something, and to do something with reasonable amount of understanding and expertise. So for instance, writing could be looked at as a competency. Conversing fluently could be a competency. Interpreting sources in history could be a competency. Conducting a scientific investigation could be a competency, and so on, right? Now, it's pertinent to ask, what does it take to do competency-based assessments, right? Because if you're talking about unpacking competency-based assessments, it's also important to see how these competencies unfold in school education. So, for instance, if we take a very common competency like writing, now we know that writing is one of the most foundational areas that through school education and particularly through the teaching of language, we would like to nurture among students. So at the end of the foundational stage, perhaps the expectation from our learners is that they would be able to write even a few sentences independently, wherein they sort of elaborate on their experiences, or they write about their emotions, or they write about a particular picture. Now, as the child transitions from foundational to preparatory stage, it is expected that the child will be able to adopt specific strategies for writing. So when you write, are you able to sequence the way you write? Are you able to identify the headings, the subheadings? Are you able to provide a title to what you write, right? As one moves from preparatory to middle stage, the level of complexity increases. It's expected that the child will develop a certain degree of proficiency in that competency of writing. So it's expected that the child will be able to write across various forms. The child will be able to write a prose, the child will be able to write a poem, the child will be able to create posters. And in the process of doing that, the child will also be able to apply linguistic structures and rules such as the use of punctuation marks and all of that while they are writing. And it's obvious that when one moves to secondary stage, the expectation is even much more complex. So the students are expected to develop competencies such as the ability to write narratives, descriptive writings, persuasive writings. They're able to appreciate, analyze, evaluate written materials of different journals, right? So what I'm essentially trying to say is that in order to do competency-based assessments, there are a couple of prerequisites. First and foremost, it's important for us to see how these competencies unfold in our curriculum framework. And having a sense of that progression is extremely critical. It's extremely foundational for us to do competency-based assessments. Secondly, I think that in our enthusiasm of doing competency-based assessment, we also need to be mindful whether our classroom processes provide ample opportunities for students to build, to hone, to nurture these capacities. So when I'm talking about writing, is it that our children are being given the opportunities in the classroom to build this kind of skill? And thirdly, of course, that it then means that how do you design a wide variety of assessments so that you're able to assess these various competencies across stages? So when we do competency-based assessments, I think having an understanding of all these three things becomes important.
Thanks, Aanchal, for helping us to understand that competencies are not seen in isolation and it comes from education, right? And you have beautifully put how we need to see the progression of competency from one stage to other. And importantly, that assessment should not be seen in isolation. It should be, if we want to develop competency among the students, it should be rightly done from the classroom. So, Shilpi, Aanchal has unfolded the meaning of competency, that it is derived from curricular goals, aims of education. So now a question to you is, why are these so important? Yeah, Shilpi.
Yeah, thanks, Ronita. And good afternoon, everyone. I think the question which you have posed just now, the importance of competency-based assessment, and I will try to draw a few things which Aanchal just now spoke, that it is important to understand the interlinkage of competencies to broader curricular aims and curricular goals. It is important to understand that competencies are in progression, and it is important to understand that to have a holistic understanding about the attainment of competencies, it is important to use multiple methods of assessment, right? So these three key principles, what Aanchal said, I think these basically will reflect the importance of competency-based assessment. because one of the key characteristics and one of the key features of competency-based assessment is to be able to design valid, reliable, and fair kind of assessment. And we will not be able to understand the meaning of any of these assessments if we are not clear about the principles that Aanchal just now spoke. So if we talk about the first kind of a principle, which is valid assessment, so it is important that whenever we are designing any assessments in a classroom context, those assessments should be referenced to a criteria, to certain criteria. And by criteria, I mean competencies. And these competencies are derived from our broader aims of education. So if I am saying that the assessments are aligned to the competencies, in a way, it is aligned to the aims of education, right? And it is also equally important to understand that the progression of competencies is not only across stages, but also in a class. And while we are designing assessments, it is important to understand this progression of the competencies. Say, for example, if we want to understand and if we want to design a valid assessments to understand the competency of oral expression, in that case, our assessment should be designed in such a manner that we are able to understand if our children are able to express orally through some words or through some full sentences, or sometimes they are able to relate these sentences from their personal experiences in their daily lives. So you see, so each of these lie in some kind of a continuum. So that is about the first aspect of the quality in assessment and the importance in competency-based assessment. Coming to the second point, which is about reliability. And reliability is all about ensuring consistency in assessment, consistency in students' performance in different kinds of assessment, and each of these assessments should basically try to try to assess the attainment of the same competency. So basically, we are trying to gather multiple evidences of students learning through a variety of assessment methods. Now, again, taking one example, and one of the key competency of science is to understand if children are able to describe the interdependence of humans, plants, and animals. So in this case, probably teachers might choose to use other kinds of assessment also, other than written examinations, such as focus group discussions and role play. And when the results of each of these assessments are actually triangulated, we are able to gather more meaningful and more holistic understanding of students' learning. Apart from validity and reliability, the third aspect of competency-based assessment, and which we consider as one of the core value of competency-based assessment, is fairness, which we also understand as transparency. So as teachers, our responsibility is to make students aware about the competencies in a simpler language, also to make them aware about the kind of rubrics which we will be using for assessment, so that there are no surprises, no secrets. All the assessment expectations are actually shared beforehand with students, and also enable them to monitor their own learning. So in this complete process, basically, we are making our students more aware, more independent, and more responsible about their learning. So, so to summarize, Ronita, if I have to summarize that how competency-based assessments are important, basically they helps us in gathering some evidences of students' learning, and these evidences are all valid, reliable, and fair in structure.
Thank you, Shilpi, for bringing us 2 to 3 new terms like fairness, reliability, and validity. And you have explained it beautifully through an example, because, giving an example also helps the practitioners to actually view how do you do competency-based assessment in the class. So you also spoke about not only looking at the competency in progression, but also inside the classroom. You also spoke about the multiple modes of assessment. Multiple modes of assessment, it helps us to triangulate the learning in different ways and not only in one way. So my next question to Rishi is, we had comprehensive, continuous and comprehensive evaluation and post 2005. And as Shilpi was saying about the multiple modes of assessment, CCE also catered to multiple modes of assessment. So, but what happened that we did not see the transition of CCE into competency-based assessment?
Well, Ronita, if you ask me frankly, I don't think we've actually seen CCE, in the true spirit in our classrooms, except again, as I said, there are always good examples. But otherwise, overall, we have not been able to do what NCF 2005 gave us as a framework for assessment, and multiple reasons for that. Again, going back into history, one of the reasons why Zakir Hussain committee, while they are making this report, are identifying exams as a curse is because of what it does to a teacher. A standardized assessment, when it kind of is hijacking the system, everyone is then falling in line to ensure that that exam is cleared. So a teacher's autonomy goes away. And for us, till let's say 2005, we got the NCF, which actually laid down a roadmap in terms of how our assessment reform should happen. But then our teacher education and the way teachers were looked up to had completely changed for the last, the previous 60 years or so, because they were all now just robots who were feeding into that assessment machine. So when you take away the teacher's agency, the capacity of the teacher when it is that weak, and you bring in a reform wherein you are bringing the teacher to the center along with the child, then it's very difficult for it to actually kickstart itself once again, right? So even though policy documents kept saying that we need to allow teachers to come in and play a more significant role, it never happened for various reasons. We can't go into it here. But because our teachers were not empowered, when we brought in even CCE, it couldn't really unravel itself in the way that it should have, except for a few teachers who could do it. And so that was one of the biggest reasons why, for instance, competency-based assessment, which should have come in as part and parcel of, let's say, the CCE reform, it didn't happen at all, because the teachers were looking around for support, and even that support didn't come. And we had here CCE and the system putting pressure on teachers saying that do CCE. So finally, what happened to that CCE is hilarious, because teachers started getting sheets of paper from the departments to tick and cross. And as long as they had done that, whether you understood it or not, it didn't matter. As long as you had done that, you had done CCE. So, the spirit of CCE wasn't there in whatever was done in the name of CCE. So obviously the competency-based assessments could never come in, because one of the most important thing when you're looking at education system to develop competencies in a child is also to be able to assess it in that way. And when you're building competencies, you're looking at conceptual clarity, because that's what's coming in when you're looking at competency-based development in a child. You're looking at other higher order skills, such as being analytical, being able to analyze that particular conceptual aspect that you have picked up, right? Critically think about it. Now, to do all that, the teacher will have to be given a lot more space in terms of what she would do in the name of assessment, which never came along, right? And nor did it come along in a supportive manner, because when teachers were looking around for support, very few of them got it. Yeah. So in some sense, I think we threw the baby out with the bathwater. That is really what happened, to use that cliched statement, with regard to CCE, competency-based assessment, and all those assessment reforms that came in a much more emphatic way in 2005. Though it's not that it didn't come in earlier. Earlier also, policy documents continuously emphasize on that. But 2005 till now, that has been the story.
Yeah. Thanks, Rishi. And Now, connecting to what Rishi just said, Aanchal, this question is for you. So there was a lack of, many issues were there, but then it was a very, very radical step to take and talk about CCE. But somewhere there was a disconnect, what Rishi said right now. So can you suggest some ways that can help teachers practice competency-based assessment? Or if I may say, how does a teacher practice competency-based assessment in a day-to-day classroom teaching and learning process? So that is where we actually need help. Yeah, Achha.
Yeah. Yeah, when Rishi was talking about CC, I was remembering our days in the foundation when we worked with various state governments like Uttarakhand, Madhya Pradesh, Pondicherry to actually help teachers understand the kind of paradigm shift in their classrooms that was required with the coming of CC. And at that time, I remember that there were so many teachers, teacher educators, people from the teacher support system like BRCs, CRCs, who genuinely wanted to understand how to make this transition, because everybody seemed to have an earnest desire to help their students learn better and have a better future. Now, even during that time, one of the standard statements that I used to use, and I continue to see the relevance of it, is that if competency-based assessments are happening, then you need to get evidences of that in the classroom of the teacher and not in the staff room of the teachers. So, just looking at how the teachers maintaining a record and documentation is, of course, one part of the requirement. But what is important is how is the teacher seamlessly integrating her assessments in very many formal and informal ways in order to help students learn better. So if I were to pinpoint a few specific strategies, I think I would talk about around 3 of them. First, I feel that from where I began, that very often we understand competencies very differently. I've heard many times teachers think, or many educators think, that competencies are only about the psychomotor domain. But like in the descriptions of competencies, which we have all spoken about, we see that competencies are talking about all knowledge, skills, capacities, and dispositions. So the first and foremost thing is to understand competencies and familiarize ourselves with the competencies that have been outlined in the National Curriculum Framework for foundational stage and for school education across all stages. See the progression in it, see how those competencies reflect the nature of the subject, the curricular goals, and so on, right? So I think that's the first and foremost thing. And I think it also, when you look into these competencies, it also generates a lot of ideas on what one needs to do in the classroom to nurture these competencies, right? So which brings me to the second point, that I think we also need to understand that competencies don't build overnight, right? It's not about memorizing a poem and just being able to reproduce it. We're talking about the ability to read a poem, understand the poem, and be curious and interested enough to even try and attempt to create a poem. That's the kind of competency we are talking about. So time, patience, perseverance is required. Being at it is required. And I think in being able to do that, the point that Rishi was being made about giving that kind of agency to the teacher to decide when would she like to assess something, when does she think her children are ready for have a certain degree of proficiency, and when they are ready in a particular capacity, so that she can meaningfully assess them. I think that is extremely critical, with this understanding that competencies take time to build. And the third and third thing that I think is important to do competency-based assessment is that we have to understand that competency-based assessments require a certain kind of pedagogical transformation, right? It requires us to do our classroom teaching in a fundamentally different way, where there is a lot of scaffolding of student learning, right? So I think that competency-based assessments sit beautifully in the paradigm of formative assessments, or what we call as the approach of assessment for learning, assessment as learning. And when you're doing competency-based assessments, the teacher has to be open to using a wide variety of formal, informal methods of assessment, use a plethora of authentic assessments, projects, rubrics, portfolios, anecdotal records, in order to generate those kind of reliable evidences that Shilpi was talking about, which helps her understand how her learners are learning. And it, in the process, also helps her feel good that her teaching methods are being effective, right? So I think all these three things are required. And I understand that this is not easy for a teacher to do independently. So it requires a peer group, it requires collaboration of teachers in a school, maybe across schools, so that they can share ideas of what kind of assessment methods, whether formal, informal, they can use in order to assess these competencies in a valid, reliable, and fair way.
Thank you, Aanchal. And so the next question is to Shilpi. I begin with what Aanchal said right now. Competencies don't build overnight, right? And how do you? She used a very nice word, scaffolding, right? So how do we, scaffold our teachers? How do we scaffold our students inside a classroom, so that it is embedded inside the pedagogy? So when we see assessment in isolation, you cannot have a very different question and a very different pedagogy in the classroom. So Shilpi, can you elaborate with the specific subject examples? Because what happens in a school, we see that there are many subjects, and different competencies are, and at times several same competencies are developed among the students through different subject vehicles, right? So can you give an example how teachers can conduct competency-based assessment with specific example of a subject? I think that will help.
Yeah, thanks, Ronita. And you know what? So based on my experience of dealing with teacher educators and teachers from past few years, I have always received one common question for teachers whenever I talk about competency-based assessment. And that question is, where is the time? Hai? So that's the question which we always get to hear from the teachers. Ki, you are talking about such nice, fantastic ideas, such nice, fantastic principles, but where is the time? Okay. So in this conversation, I will try to propose a few approaches where we can actually practice competency-based assessment in limited period of time, one academic year. So as Aanchal was talking about the need for understanding the nature of the subject. So if we want to conduct competency-based assessment, if we want to actually eliminate the limitations, the challenges that Rishi was speaking about while he spoke about CC. So if we want to overcome those, it is very important that if we want to do good quality assessment, it is important to understand the nature of the subject. And what do I mean by nature of the subject? Each subject basically aims to build certain kind of competencies. As you were saying that all these subjects acts like vehicles to attain the common aims of education. So each of these subjects, we will be able to build very different and unique set of competencies. So first and foremost, probably we need to understand the nature of the subjects well. And second, it is extremely important because the nature of the competencies is very different. We need to use variety of assessment methods. One kind of assessment method will not work, right? Because every assessment, every competency is unique. So we need to use different kinds of assessment methods. So these are the two key principles which probably we need to take from Aanchal's discussion, and then I will try to come to the specific example that I want to discuss on. So let me take one example from science. Okay, and so we know that whenever we talk about teaching and learning of science, we talk about very unique kind of competencies which are related to the process skills of science. That includes skills of observation, skills of drawing inferences, build some hypothesis, analyze and interpret data, most importantly, think critically and scientific temper, right? So these are certain competencies that defines the nature of science. Okay. Now, how do we gain these? How do we help students attain these competencies? Through a set of topics that are there in our syllabus documents, right? So we have photosynthesis, we have water cycle, we have chemical reactions, natural resources, natural phenomena. So these are certain topics. Now, it is important to understand that children will actually experience the joy of doing science only if the competencies, be it any topic, whatever topic I just spoke, be it any topic, if the teachers are keeping the competencies in the forefront, in the center, while planning their pedagogy and designing assessment, only then children will actually get that, what we call as joy of doing science. So let me take one very specific example, because in the interest of time, probably we will not be able to discuss an example which will actually be talking about all the competencies in science. But let me take one specific example and one topic. If we are talking about the example on water cycle, and one of the important skills of science is that if we are going through the concept of water cycle, instead of just focusing on components of water cycle, that is evaporation, condensation, and precipitation, it is important to understand that through this particular process, children are actually attaining the skill of observation and then drawing some inferences from the observation, right? Now, these are the two skills which teachers basically focus when they are going through the topic of water cycle. But it is equally important to understand that there are certain other higher order competencies also, which are related to the topic of water cycle. And that will be actually make students aware about the importance of conserving the water and natural resources, making students aware about the sources of water pollution and how this pollution actually impacts the balance between the environment and the society. So each of these competencies are very important. So the assessments, we will actually qualify the assessments as competency-based assessment only if the assessments are actually assessing all of these competencies when we are actually in the topic water cycle, right? So you see, the focus here is not on assessing if the children have learned the components of water cycle. Instead, the focus is on certain set of competencies. What are those competencies? Skills of observation, skills of drawing inferences, and most importantly, skill of basically appreciating the interface between science and society, isn't it? So probably a teacher can actually use concept maps so that a fair understanding is obtained that children are aware about the components of water cycle. Teacher can also use journals where students are recording their own experiences from their daily lives, build some models, also make them do some hands-on activities. So these are certain, we call them as authentic assessment. And in our PG Diploma in Education Assessment that we are recently launching, the second certificate program on formative assessment, we will actually be talking about these authentic assessments, which will help in gathering valid and reliable evidences of students' learning.
Yeah. Thanks, Shilpi. What I have understood till now that we need to go towards competency-based assessment. What are competencies? What are knowledge, skills, and dispositions? And throughout the policies, we have seen the journey of assessment. Coming to you, when you said, when you spoke about, science, and we have a set of competencies. So we have a set of competencies in all the subjects. There is some kind of overlapping among the competencies across subjects, and some subjects have very specific disciplinary thinking, if I may say, that is the competency of that particular subject, right? So it's very important that, as you also said, as you also mentioned, that these competencies are also based on the criteria. So when we are assessing students based on certain criteria, we actually give what we say a competency based assessment, which is reliable, valid, and fair. Now I would like to hear your closing views and thoughts on competency-based assessment, and basically how do we take it ahead? So Rishi, how prepared are we at the systemic level to move towards a competency-based assessment?
Well, I think it's not a simple single answer, Ronita, for this. As if all of us carefully hear what Aanchal and Shilpi have shared with us, we will be able to figure out for ourselves as to where is it that we are prepared adequately enough, and where is it that we need further support, right? So for each of us, I think the answer would be different from one another's. But then from a systemic point of view, I think a lot is happening. To begin with, the NEP laying the ground, providing us a policy direction, and ensuring that anyone who wants to move in this direction knows exactly what has to be done, either to bring in further policies, guidelines. And so, that is kind of already put in place through NEP. And NEP had recommended that NCF should come in to talk about it in detail with examples. And that's the reason why we have NCF today, which is hundreds of pages, because there are these specific examples of, what does one mean by a competency? So one teacher understanding as to what does it mean to develop competencies in her subject in a specific area. Once that is understood, then it's a few steps ahead already, because then you have to figure out as to how do you assess now as to how that competency has developed. So you are creating that path towards to move towards competency-based assessment, rather than talk about it as a concept and just ask any teacher to just take it up. So in that sense, there is the policy directive, or let's say a direction that is provided by NEP. Then there is a framework that has emerged from NCF. Now, along with this, as you would have noticed while Aanchal and Shilpi are speaking, a lot of capacity is required within the system. And it is not just teacher capacity, it is teacher educator capacity, it is capacity in terms of material development that is required for the appropriate kind of content, and a host of other capacities. Now, for that, I feel that there is a lot more that needs to be done. But then there are already the first steps that have been taken. So for instance, the NEP recommended the establishment of a National Assessment Center. Now, PARAK, which is an acronym for P, performance, assessment, R, review and analysis, and of knowledge for holistic development, right? So PARAK is basically assessing, reviewing, analyzing knowledge for holistic development. So now this body is there, and it is kind of giving directions, enabling various boards to take inputs from the work that is happening at the National Assessment Center, so which is again systematically providing the scaffolding, which Aanchal was talking of for teachers, in a very well thought out manner, and coming from the system. So it's a systemic support that is emerging. So there are many things which are already established, many things which are getting established, and I think we are moving into a very good space compared to where we were in 2005, when NCF spoke about competency-based assessment, brought in CCE, but then, we felt that there were many things which had still not come into place. So currently we've overcome those barriers. We have come to this place. Now I think it is each one of us as stakeholders ensuring that we move ahead in this direction, because that is the way good education can happen. And, if we really are interested in ensuring that education is very closely aligned to the aims that we have for school education, then we all will have to contribute towards moving in this direction of ensuring that there is the assessment that happens is competency-based, wherever it happens. In fact, competency-based assessment can happen even at the summative board level. right? Many, in fact, think that, oh, it's all the onus is on the teacher, as long as, it happens within the classroom, with the teacher's agency being there, it's all sorted. No, I mean, it will have to be across the system. And so even at the board exam, this is required. In fact, that's the reason why board exam reforms is a big thing as part of NEP. Recently, there was also this idea of having 2 sets of board exams, and many, of course, misinterpreted it as extra burden. But then the idea that was coming in is that you lighten the high stakes quotient of the board exams, right? Or you reduce the high stakes quotient, so a child can take a board exam, twice, may decide to just take a few subjects once, take a few other subjects the next time, based on the child's own assessment, or the parents and teachers included their assessment of where the child is. They kind of are able to do this across a year, rather than all do it within the span of 30 days. Now, these are all various things. It's not directly linked to what we are specifically discussing today, competency-based assessment, but then these assessment reforms, that you don't have one high-stake exam that will determine the child's entire progress or move into the higher education, right? Let the child be able to pace it, because once we are allowing that from a systemic point of view, everyone in the system starts understanding, okay, the self-paced aspect should be there for everyone. The child and then the teacher understand, okay, teacher also has a self-paced aspect to it. So and that's the reason why, for instance, a Diksha platform where teachers are able to enroll for various capacity development programs, which are self-paced. Now, all these are different pieces of this puzzle which needs to fall into place. Now, the puzzles have emerged, some pieces have fallen into place, and I think we are in a good state. In the next 10 years, if we are able to really focus and go with the direction that is there through the policy and the frameworks that we have, and with all the support that is emerging, I think we are headed in the right direction. So I do feel that I'm optimistic about where we are currently and in which way we are headed, but still lots of work to be done.
So thanks, lot of hope, Rishi. And so Shilpi, we had lot of examples, around school and around classroom. Can you also speak about this competency-based assessment? How is it going to play a larger role in large-scale systemic level assessments? Shilpi?
Yeah, thanks, Ronita. Yeah, yes. So, actually, we have spoken a lot about classroom context so far. We have actually taken examples from classroom. All the examples that we have taken are from classroom. So let me try to talk about competency-based assessment, or the utility of competency-based assessment for all purposes of assessment. As Rishi was saying, that we are in a very good state, and if we continue for next 10 years, probably in all our schools and all our teachers will actually be practicing competency-based assessment. So in that case, probably now we need to understand that competency-based assessments are equally useful for other purposes of assessments also. So when I'm saying other purposes of assessment, I mean assessments that are conducted to understand systemic health. For example, National Achievement Survey or State Achievement Surveys. Similarly, there are assessments which are conducted for selection purposes. So by that, I mean that it can be some kind of entrance examination, something which has been recently launched, such as CUET, Common University Entrance Test, and assessments that are, again, these are selection kind of assessments only, which are for recruitment. We also conduct assessments for selection for recruitment purposes. So what I mean to say is competency-based assessments are used across all purposes and all kinds of assessment. So in case of assessments for accountability, or we also call it as large-scale assessments. So for such kind of assessments, what happens is the focus of these assessments is to understand students' learning across common benchmarks of learning. And what do I mean by common benchmarks of learning? By common benchmarks of learning, I mean the competencies, which Aanchal was mentioning, and Rishi also mentioned that these are specified in our NCF documents. So we are basically trying to assess students' ability across against these common benchmarks of learning. So to take one example, if we want to understand that suppose we are conducting a large-scale assessment, a national achievement survey, and we want to understand that what percentage of students are actually able to read and comprehend a given passage. So in that case, probably in a large-scale assessment context, we actually use only multiple choice questions. So probably we might choose passages which are of different complexity level. And these passages, we can design a few questions which will actually assess students' ability to access information from the given passage. And when they have accessed the information, if they are able to now move to certain higher cognitive skills, such as they are able to integrate the information, they are able to reflect on the given information, they're also able to evaluate the information, isn't it? So what I want to say is that competency-based assessments are also conducted in case of large-scale assessment and also in case of assessments for selection. In this case, when we design competency-based assessment for selection, we basically design the competency frameworks in such a manner that the competencies are aligned well with either the higher education stream that we have chosen or the job role for which we have applied. And again, as I have told you, that the competencies are basically aligned to the stream or the job role. So coming to one example, if we know that for entrance examination, we have IIT JEE, we have CLAT for law, we have NEET for medical. So each of these, the competency frameworks for each of these exams are designed in a manner that these competencies are aligned to that particular education stream. So for example, if I have to talk about CLAT, so the focus here is on competencies such as logical reasoning, quantitative techniques, and reading comprehension. Similarly, the competencies that gets assessed in NEET, because again, this is the entrance exam for MBBS, the focus is on assessment of process skills of science, which we have recently spoken about, that is of observation, experimentation, analyzing the data, interpreting the data, etc. So it is equally important to understand that competency-based assessment is not only useful for classroom context, but across all the purposes of understand. And since it is important for all purposes of assessment, it becomes very, very crucial that there is a good common shared understanding of these assessments among all the stakeholders in education. Then only the results of these assessments, these kind of assessments, will be used meaningfully to help students learn better, to help teachers teach better. Yeah, thanks, Ronita.
Yeah. So, Aanchal, what kind of preparation do we anticipate in this goal of competency-based assessment?
Yeah, I think I'll just try to take some threads from what Rishi and Shilpi have said. And primarily, I think that I feel everything hinges on building a common shared understanding and building that sort of expertise, building that sort of faith in the teacher and the fact that she is going to be able to do this well, right? Now, it's also important to understand that a lot of these policy changes, a lot of these curriculum reforms require that sort of orientation, requires professional development programs. So I think one of the foremost things that would be required as a preparation to do competency-based education, which we have all recognized as the need of the hour, is first to give enough time to building teacher professional development. And I mean teacher professional development both at the pre-service and the in-service level. Now, when I say teacher professional development, I don't mean a 4-day workshop or a 5-day training program or a Zoom webinar, which will help in unpacking everything. I mean continuing education programs which are rooted in the context of the teacher who teaches in a school where there are 50 children who are at diverse learning levels, which are rooted in the context of India. You know, the kind of challenges, the kind of diversities we experience in our day-to-day classrooms, which are rooted on sound theoretical principles. So if you're talking about, say, formative assessment, it's important to talk about the work of various practitioners in India, various institutions in India who have actually tried to do formative assessments in a seamless way, right? If we are talking about large scale systemic assessments, it's important to see how are we designing large scale assessments in our country? How is one assessment different from the other? Are they telling us the same kind of things? So when we are looking at ASSER, or we are looking at a national achievement survey, or we are looking at a census state achievement survey, are they giving us common insights? How are their methods different? So I think this kind of understanding, expertise, and capacity to appreciate assessments, develop the expertise to do assessments is the need of the hour. And we need continuing education programs for all kinds of practitioners, whether they are teachers or whether they are people working with teachers, people who are in leadership roles. So we need this kind of professional development programs, I believe, for all kinds of stakeholders in education. Secondly, I think that it is very important to have as many resources as we can, which are freely available for teachers to just download and use and learn and then contextualize. So whether there are item banks, assessment frameworks, short papers, case studies, rubrics, any kind of tools, a graded worksheet that you may have developed, I think it's important to share and collaborate and have as many resources as we can put out there so that teachers can use it and benefit from it. Which also brings me to the third point, that something that I said earlier, that this can't be a lone journey. You need a community of learners. You need that sort of teacher community, whether you call it a peer learning group or a teacher learning collaborative, a consortium, or whatever you want to call it as. But you need that kind of a community of learners who are teachers, who are practitioners, who can collaborate, come share their experiences and sort of leverage on what each of them is trying to do. If you have tasted success in something, share it with others and see if they can benefit from it. So I think there is need for that sort of collaboration. And lastly, I think that at the something which I think was being referred to when Shilpi was talking about, that we have many different kinds of assessments and they serve different kinds of purposes. But it's important that what we assess sort of remains somewhat common across these assessments, right? The way we assess might differ. So it's understandable when a large scale systemic assessment tries to use multiple choice questions, but it's not fair for all subject teachers also to only design multiple choice questions when it comes to their classroom based assessments, because if you really want to develop competencies, you also need to provide assessments that are valid, that are aligned to the kind of competency that you're assessing. So I think that all our assessments should, irrespective of what purpose they are meant to be, it's important that they are rooted in the competencies, which are in turn rooted in the nature of the subject, the curricular goals, and are beautifully progressing from foundational, preparatory, middle to secondary stage. And I think only when we are able to bring that sort of coherence and continuity across our assessments, we will be able to help our learners learn better. We will be able to see teachers being able to teach better, and we will be able to realize the vision of education, which is beautifully put across all our school education and various policy documents. So I think these are some of the things that we would require as preparation to realize the goals of attainment of competencies and doing competency-based assessments.
Yeah, so thank you. So before I summarize, I think questions have started coming up, and We will take the questions first. I'll take. One is from Anand Kumar. One of the challenges faced by teacher is the nature of competency-based assessment, which often invites multiple possible answers and makes it difficult in the current teacher-student ratio. Any thoughts or suggestions on that? Anyone? Any one of you can take this question. This is by Anand.
Yeah, perhaps I will attempt that, because I am myself a student of social science, and one of the things that I value the most is the need for open-ended assessments, and assessments where students have a voice. So I think what's important is to see why are we doing what we are doing, right? So if we really want our students to be able to analyze, and if we fundamentally believe that all students are equally curious, are equally competent to learn, then we will have to give them that kind of space to also respond to a question which is based on analysis in different ways, right? So I think somewhere our expectation of a one common answer is something that we need to reflect on. Now, having said that, I don't mean to say that questions which are based on facts and core facts of a discipline can be assessed with multiple kinds of responses, but the manner in which the student chooses to use the language for his or her response could vary, right? So I think that in order to do competency based assessments where there are multiple kinds of responses, it's also our appreciation for that sort of diversity that our students bring, not just in the way they think, but also being able to provide them the space and opportunity to present their thoughts in different ways. Now, as a teacher, what's important is that you have a set of criteria which is known to you, and maybe over a period of time also known to your learners, so that they know that when they are framing their arguments on a question that that you have asked, they know that these 3-4 things have to be explicitly present. So for instance, the importance of evidence, especially in social sciences, when you're framing an argument. So have you quoted the right evidence? If there are multiple evidences about a particular fact, say it's a fact in history, is there reference to multiple kinds of evidences, right? Then if you have asked the student to present their own thought about that particular phenomena in history, then is the child able to provide a certain opinion on that particular phenomena in history, where she uses those evidences as anchors to sort of build her argument, right? So I think one can very confidently do competency based assessments even in the presence of multiple answers, provided the criteria that you will be using for your assessment is fairly clear to you as well as to your learners whom you are assessing. And I think that's also one of the fundamental principles of fairness, right? Where students know what are they being assessed on.
Thanks, Aanchal. And we have one question which actually talks about the pain of CC. And so, those thoughts and those difficulties which the teachers faced is a kind of addressed in this question also. Syllabus completion is a mandatory responsibility that falls on teachers. How do you see the connection between the subject syllabus and the competency?
I think I can take this question, and Aanchal and Rishi can add. While I was giving that example from science about how competency-based assessment can actually be used in the classroom, I actually started with this particular question only: where is the time? So I would again come back to the same justification that probably if we are able to focus on competencies and not the concepts alone. So if we are not thinking about that these are the concepts that child should know, instead the focus should be on the broader competencies. That way, probably, even if we are focusing on limited number of concepts, the same set of competencies students can easily attain. Similarly, if you just take an example of language, and if suppose we have some 16 to 17 chapters in language, but the skill which child actually attains as far as reading comprehension is concerned, if a child is able to access the information, child is able to infer certain details which are there in the passage, if a child is able to evaluate. So these are the competencies. So even if you are if you're teaching 1 or 2 chapters, or if you're teaching 16 or 17 chapters, if the focus is on competencies, probably this particular tension or this particular anxiety which remains in teacher's mind, that how should I complete the syllabus then? In fact, if you go through NCF, you will see that the focus is on competencies, and then the concepts and the topics come after we have a good understanding of competencies, because we would want that teachers should keep competencies at the center and not the topics which are given in the syllabus document. Yeah, Rishi, would you like to add?
Yeah, no, that was very well said, Shilpi. Thank you. I think, but as part of that question, there was this question about, syllabus or competencies, right? I think, at this point of time, there could be some mismatch there. But as we move in this direction of ensuring that we have, we operate within the curricular framework that is provided as part of NCF and other SCFs that will emerge, this mismatch will be reduced, because be it syllabus creators or content developers, they will have to necessarily now look at, what are the learning outcomes that are being stated, and and hence what competencies would these learning outcomes enable a child to achieve, right, or to grasp. So it is this connection that is going to become part of the syllabus and any other content that is going to get created for the syllabus, including the textbooks. So this is a period when these things will have to fall into place. And hence, it is very important for all of us who are participating in the education process to understand the direction in which we are moving. And it is in this context that the 592 pages of NCF is important. That we need to really, as people involved in education, read this document, and it will also give us examples and give us clarification to some of the questions that we may have in our mind. In fact, I do see some questions here in the chat box also, which will get clarification, in the NCF. One question I'll just quickly touch upon. It was about, I think, competencies and learning outcomes, right? What is the difference? So if, for instance, that's something which is very nicely, explained in very, very simple language in the NCF, which talks about overall what are the learning standards, right? So as part of the learning standards, NCF talks about how there are curricular aims right at the top, and then from that, one derives curricular goals, which is giving specific directions. And then from there, we come to the competencies, and then we arrive at the learning outcomes. So, and there are these short 3-4 sentence explanations with examples. For instance, one example which you will get in page number 26 is with regard to language. And it starts with example of what is the curricular aim, right? So one of the curricular aims as part of studying language is to develop rational thought and independent thinking. So now what is that is given there as an example. Now from that, rational thought and independent thinking being the aim, what is the curricular goal, for developing through language? Now, curricular goals could be for different stages. So let's say rational thought, something at the secondary stage. Now, how do you use language to develop reasoning and argumentative skills? By engaging with variety of audio and written material is a curricular goal. Now, how do you do that is really what one will have to think about. From that curricular goal emerges the competency. That is, if it is developing reasoning and argumentation skills, again, remember, this is a goal for the aim of rational thought. Now we very easily talk about independent thinking, critical thinking, rational thought, but then see how it kind of, comes finally to that learning outcome that we would be trying out, or we would be ensuring the child gets at the class. So from that aim of rational thought, you come to a goal which is about developing reasoning and argumentation skills, right? Using whatever be the methods. And then you come to the competency, which is arguing with proper rationale by carefully evaluating the premises. Yeah. Now, if you look at it, just that example Aanchal gave, I want to connect you to history, wherein evidence is very important. Now, working on evidence and sources and authenticity of sources also could lead you to achieve that curricular aim of rational thought, right? But here, an example given is language, and as to how the language related teaching, learning is providing you this roadmap to get that curricular aim. So arguing with proper rationale by carefully evaluating the premises is the competency. Now, for that, there could be many learning outcomes. How do you ensure that a child has this particular competency developed, that he or she can argue in a rational manner, right? Now, the different outcomes that we will have to assess for. Now, this is something that we really look for as a teacher in a classroom. So is the child being able to evaluate the premises of an argument for its clarity, for its relevance, and for its reliability? That is evidence. Is the child being able to do that? Now, that is what we are supposed to assess for when we have a material given to the child. It could be the textbook, but we understand material only in the form of textbook, but the material can be anything. It could be a newspaper article, right? So that is one. The other one, is the child able to recognize own emotional biases while reading and listening, right? Now, these are the learning outcomes which will all the way go to tell us whether that educational aim, in fact, curricular aim, but an educational aim of becoming a rational individual with independent thinking is there or not. Yeah? Now, there are multiple examples of this kind in the National Curricular Framework, and hence I once again request all of you that you should look at the National Curricular Framework if you have it. Sorry for that extra time, Ronita. I just thought that it would be
it's okay, Rishi, and you have addressed through this question, you have addressed many other questions. So the another one is from Lakshima. Is there any framework that defines similar competencies and assessment around socio-emotional constructs for India?
Sorry, Ronita, there was also some hand which came up while I was speaking. So if someone wants to come online as well, because they may not be able to type. So if you just want to take a look at that.
Anyone who has raised hand?
Ronita, Dr. Pramila Kudva wants to ask some question.
Yeah, ma'am. Please go ahead. You are in mute. Can you please unmute?
Yeah. I don't have a question per se, but I wanted to add to whatever you've been saying. The teachers are of the opinion the syllabus has to be completed. There is no time. But if they were to sit together, the NEP very clearly says the core curriculum has to be looked into and not the 17 or 20 chapters, which are not necessary. So if the whole team were to sit together and decide, these are the things which we need to do for the next year, and we're going to focus on that, then it becomes easier for everybody to follow it. This is just my thought. And secondly, when you plan your lesson, for instance, you want to focus on observation as a skill in a science lesson, and you plan it in such a way that you use the prediction, explanation, observation, and explanation, POE method for teaching science, then your job is done. So I think combining these things, being a little creative, I think we can meet what we have to. And I think some of us have a bigger responsibility being in the urban setup, having been exposed to various resources. If we don't do that, I think the others will not be able to follow us. Thank you.
Yeah, so going back to the question, is there any framework that defines similar competencies and assessment around socio-emotional constructs for India? This is by Rakshima.
Yeah, no, so I would like to talk about that, Ronita.
Yeah.
Recently, while I was reading the National Curriculum Framework for School Education, I came across three very beautiful phrases to describe values. So the National Curriculum Framework talks about ethical and moral values, it talks about democratic values, and it talks about epistemic values. And at the same time, it talks about a number of dispositions and capacities. So right from having a positive work ethic to having the capacities of inquiry. So I think that one way of looking at a framework which sort of uh, describe socio-emotional constructs would be the National Curriculum Framework. And in the description of competencies that I gave in the beginning, that, competencies are ability to do something and do it reasonably well with a fair degree of understanding and expertise. So I believe that there are a lot of these competencies which are available unpacked as constructs in the National Curriculum Framework across different school subjects. So if you look at art education, you look at physical education, you look at vocational education, you look at language education, science education, social science education, mathematics education, you'll find all these socio-emotional constructs, values, and dispositions very beautifully integrated. Because it's important to understand that socio-emotional capacities cannot be taught in isolation. They are a fundamental part of the school culture. So both nurturing the socio-emotional capacities in schools as well as assessing them in a seamless manner while you are doing your regular classrooms is very important. When it comes to other frameworks, as a university, we have done a lot of work in socio-emotional well-being of students, and on our website there are certain frameworks, one of which is the well-being framework, where we've tried to define socio-emotional constructs various kinds. But in addition to that, I think there is work that's also been done by other organizations on socio-emotional learning and socio-emotional capacity. But what's important is that just assessing those socio-emotional capacities are not enough unless they are a part of the school culture, embodied and appreciated by not just the students, but by the teachers and the entire community of educators who are part of that school. Only then will you be able to nurture those socio-emotional capacities. And I would strongly recommend reading sections on values and dispositions in order to get a larger framework on how you view these areas in the context of the school curriculum.
So looking at a time, we can take one more question from Lokesh. This is how to design competencies and learning objectives while considering individual differences in the classroom. Also, what role can ICT play in competency-based assessment in the context of formative assessments and 360-degree assessments? You can take, we can divide the question into two parts. One of you can take how to design competencies and learning objectives while considering individual differences. And then we take up what is the role of ICT.
I think while we were having a discussion, Ronita, both Aanchal and I spoke about one specific term, okay, and that term was progression. And we were repeatedly using this term, that it is important to understand that the way competencies are defined across stages. So by stages, I mean for foundational, preparatory, middle, and secondary stages. So you will see that they are in progression. So by progression, I mean that for the same concept, for the same content, this kind of skills which we want to build among students, the complexity increases as you move to the higher level. Okay. Similarly, the progression is also in one class. So when we are talking about individual differences, probably it will be useful to have an understanding of this progression. And it is important to understand that each of the children in a classroom will lie in certain kind of a continuum. And if we are able to understand the progression, we will actually be able to have a good, fair understanding that where are our children in reference to the final competency and what kind of scaffolding will be required. And as far as our experiences are concerned, while we are working with students in field locations, what we have observed is that we have finite number of groups. So if we are able to understand the progression in the competency, okay. So by progression, I mean, if I'm talking about writing ability, then there can be different levels of writing ability. Probably a student is able to write, but probably grammatically it is not correct. Probably a student is able to write in correct grammatical way, but the passage is not coherent. Probably the student is able to write coherently, grammar is correct, but not able to relate it with personal experiences. So there can be different levels, right? Now, what I want to say is, based on our experience, there will be finite number of groups of children, and each of these group of children will need similar kind of scaffolding to basically attain the final goal and the final set of competency. Okay. So what I would like to conclude here is, if we want to actually address the individual difference among children in the classroom, it is important to understand the progression in the competency, and then use this progression to classify the students into finite number of groups, and then design pedagogy and assessments accordingly based on their learning levels.
Yeah, thanks, Shilpi. I think you also mentioned about the individual differences about when we were talking about the multiple modes of assessment also. So we have Shubhra ma'am raising her hand. Ma'am, can you unmute and ask? Yeah, Shubhra ma'am, please go ahead.
Audible, ma'am?
Yeah, audible. Please go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. So, a very good discussion was going on, and I would like to add that the question of socio-emotional and ethical development. So, the curricular goals, CG4 and CG5, they are well mentioned in NCF 2020. So, somebody has asked about it. And also the other document from the work of Tata Simha School, Tata School of Social Sciences on mental health. So they have done a wonderful work in this area. I think whoever wants to go through that work should go for that, because in COVID they have done a real research, like first kind of research, and I was a part of that. Like I attended programs, and they were really very good in those terms. And the another question that ma'am was just she has taken is that the question of ICT. So now there are students who are of various needs, like the students who have special needs, the differently able students. They are also a part of our inclusive classrooms. So we should also cater to their needs, right? So in that case, the open libraries, like the open portals, the Diksha portal, and the open library, that is Chetna, is a very good platform where children with special needs are can go there, and this is particular catering to their own needs. Like they can increase the font size, the assistive learning devices are over there, how to use them, how a child with like with learning disability, dyslexia, dyscalculia, they can use it by themselves. And some of the like platforms are there where they can go to these platforms and they can enroll themselves, and they can when we say pictorial forms and experimentation, virtual labs, all things are over there catering to their needs. So when I say the children with special needs, it's not only about the children with special needs. There are students in our classes, they have not been identified as children with special needs, but still they have somewhere their socioeconomic backgrounds, like they're very deprived in some terms, culturally migrated, or the children with migrant laborers, they also are included in those, they should be included in them. Like the NEP is saying that we have now we have now included these all six categories into the inclusive classrooms, right? These are also included as children with special needs. So somebody has asked about the question that how can I cater to the needs of my students? So I think their ICT comes and plays a big role and assist teacher as well as the students. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shubhra ma'am, from bringing different aspect of individual differences and how we can take it. And you can share. I think you mentioned some kind of
Yes, sir.
yeah. So you can just type there also, so that it can help us also to read those.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So can we take one more
Thank you,
question
ma'am.
or? Huh? So it's already 5:30. So it is, aren't the different competencies in NCF of varying breadths? Huh? Some allow for multiple LOs while some are restricted to couple. How do the teachers tackle that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Ronita, perhaps I can take that question.
Yeah,
And
please.
just on the previous point that Shubhra madam was speaking about, I think one way of looking at diversity in our classroom is that each one of us is diverse, right? And not necessarily associating diversity and diverse learning needs to a particular type or a particular kind. So, in the context of universal design of learning, in the context of appreciating diversity, the kind of differences students bring into a classroom can also become a very useful instructional material for the teacher to design her classrooms in a much more interactive and in a much more meaningful way. So perhaps we also need to look at diversity as a strength and not as an issue which needs some sort of remediation or resolution, right? So that's what I wanted to add to. I wanted to bring that perspective to what was being discussed. Now, when it comes to the question that you posed, Ronita,
Yeah.
can you just please repeat that once again?
So this is question from Nishant.
LOs being at different.
Yes, are in the different
Yeah.
competencies NCF of varying breadths.
Yes.
And some allow for multiple LOs while some are restricted just to a couple of.
Yes.
How do teachers tackle? And this is from Nishant.
Yes. So I think one way of looking at it is that across all the stages of school education, the competencies in the hierarchy of the learning standards, like Rishi was mentioning, are articulated at the stage level. So you have a competency which is supposed to be nurtured among students over 3, 4, or 5 years of schooling. Now, quite understandably, these competencies, depending on what they reflect, will have X number of LOs. So if I'm talking about a competency such as understanding sources of evidence in building a social science narrative, then it is obvious that that particular competency will have many LOs, because evidences are not just important in understanding and creating a narrative in history. It's equally important in geography. It's important in political science. It's important in economics. So depending on how critical and core that particular competency is for that subject, the number of LOs will vary. Now, again, there are certain competencies which are quite higher order competencies. For instance, when we talk about, I remember Shilpi mentioning something like the interdependence of science and society. Now, that is something that will perhaps emerge only at the end of middle stage or at the beginning of secondary stage. So, because it's important for the students to also develop a comprehensive understanding and expertise of the core concepts in a particular subject, because whatever you do with that knowledge is built on a very strong foundation of the facts, the concepts, the principles, right? So a competency like understanding the interdependence of science and society will understandably have fewer number of LOs, right? So I think that once you engage with the competencies in light of the curricular goals, in light of the curricular aims, and there was a phrase used, the nature of the subject, you will yourself be able to see why certain competencies have more learning outcomes under them and why some of them have less. The learning outcomes are also not yet published. So, but the fact is that once they get published also, we will see this kind of unevenness, and perhaps we need to appreciate that in light of how core and essential a competency is, and how much is that, working as a foundational or as a building block for students to develop the disciplinary thinking, the process of doing that subject, and the right kinds of values and dispositions, right?
So thank you,
Yeah.
Aanchal.
Sorry, Ronita, just quickly to add
Shilpi.
to that, no? I mean, the question there, in that question you read out, it also said, how does a teacher handle, right?
Yeah.
So now, yeah. So what Aanchal said, not necessarily that teachers handle that entirely by themselves, right? As I think Dr. Kudwa also was mentioning, we are all in it together and we have to work together, including, let's say, the syllabus creators. Yeah, so in this case, and as Aanchal said, the learning outcomes have not yet been published. But then as they get published, these things are going to be given attention so that teachers do know as to these are the set of learning outcomes leading to the development of these competencies. And, it's not a confusion wherein they are deciding by themselves as to, which is the core of it all and how do I go about it. So there is going to be further from the state education departments and the other nodal academic agencies, there would be further guidelines that would be available. This is part of how it is envisaged in NEP. Now, we do hope, of course, that all stakeholders as seriously work on it so that teachers are not burdened to figure out everything. It is important for them to read, understand, and appreciate as to what is being suggested. But, to be able to get clarifications, there would be support systems available. I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Any questions? Yeah, Shalini. Please go ahead, Shalini.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I think it was a wonderful panel discussion. The only question which I had was because of some tech issues, I could not post the entire question. It depends on the fairness of marks. For example, if it is a competency-based assessment, could also be a paper pencil test, or it could be something like creative writing or public speaking or a spoken activity in a classroom. How does the teacher ensure, or like across the teachers teaching the same grade, ensure the fairness of marks? I think teachers themselves are sometimes a little confused on probably say, for example, if I as a teacher give say 8 on 10 for a child who's done public speaking on a particular topic from a lesson, whereas another teacher, a co-teacher has given 7. How do we ensure that fairness of marks in a competency-based test, which is little broader in perspective and in nature and not very much related to the paper pencil kind of test? That was precisely my question.
Thanks, Shalini ma'am. Any one of you can take. Shilpi, you are taking this question?
Yeah, I can take, and then Rishi, do you want to take?
Anyone?
Go ahead, Shilpi.
Yeah. Yes, Shalini ma'am. So I think that's a very pertinent question to ask. And when we were talking about fairness, we were saying that is also one of the important aspect of competency-based assessment. And competency-based assessment actually enables fairness. So in such a scenario, what do we do to ensure comparability in a class and across different classes? So one idea or one way is to spend some dedicated time on designing rubrics. And our experience say, we at the university, whenever we design such kind of assessments which are competency based and which actually spans for longer duration. So it is not like written exams that ends within 3 hours. It spans for longer duration. So for any such assessment, rubrics are very, very helpful, where we actually try to design certain criteria for assessment. So if the competency is broader, say we are focusing on skills of, suppose the competency is problem solving. Now, how do we understand this problem solving? What are the final criteria to understand if the students have attained problem solving or not in math, in science? Okay. So first we try to break the broader competency into specific criteria of assessment. And the next, probably we need to spend some time as teachers and probably a group of teachers, because Rishi is constantly emphasizing that probably we all should work together towards it. We should try to design some descriptions for different levels of performance. So if there is one specific criteria on problem solving, say child is able to define the problem well, that is how well a student is able to define the problem. So in this case, when will we say that child has reached level 3 or level 2 or level 1? We need to write clear descriptions of performance for each and every criteria. And believe me, again, I'm saying based on our experience. So Aanchal and I co-teach a course, and when we use such rubrics. We will always try to pilot a rubric. We will try to evaluate same set of responses. We will take some 5 responses. We will evaluate same set of responses using the same rubric, and then we will try to see if there is an alignment between my scoring and Aanchal's scoring. So, and it really works. So I would say that to ensure fairness in a class and across classes, probably having a comprehensive and a detailed rubrics is a way to go ahead.
Yeah. And I would,
you want to add?
yeah, I just want to add that, there's more and more being discussed about having such multi-criterion rubrics, because, there was a time when we would allot 10 marks, say, for an essay writing. And then there used to be just some headings, that title, ideas, originality. But the more and more we are looking at multi-criterion assessments, we are talking about defining each criteria, in the manner in which Shilpi gave us an example. It's also important to appreciate that we need such multi-criterion assessments because we are talking about competency-based assessments. We're not talking about certain factual learning or certain rote memorization of some facts which are very easy to assess. So when we're talking about more and more complex forms of learning, which will help our students become competent and develop competencies, it's important to invest that kind of time and energy in designing these rubrics and designing it so that it works for your group of children. See, one of the things I often find that we download some rubrics from the net. Now those rubrics may not work for my class. So when we say that a student needs to design assessments keeping the context of the learners and the context of the learning that's happening in her classroom. Actually, if you design a rubric for, say, writing or for reading or even for conducting a science experiment, you will see that you will be able to also, through those rubrics, understand your learners and the pace at which they are learning much better. So I see this as a very iterative, cyclical process that when you assess your students more deeply, actually you're also able to teach them. So therefore, the teaching and the learning and the assessment goes hand in hand together.
Yeah, just very quick, since Aanchal brought that topic of iterative cycle and having to develop these as part of this whole reform, it could be done not just in universities but even in schools in older classes, to engage the learners in development of rubric. Because this fairness and a host of things which we associate as something that has to come from elsewhere, even that has to be lessened, right? So this reform is also towards ensuring that we create transparency of a kind in assessment that is very important for what is it that we would like to do. It can't be the same kind that of a model that we currently have, wherein everything comes out as a secret. Rubric is a secret of the instructor. The exam is very secretly done by the invigilators. So there has to be much more transparency, and particularly at the school level, because it is about, again, Shilpi mentioned that word that both Shilpi and Aanchal have been using, progress. So it is about ensuring that there is help towards attaining that progress, right? So all fairness is basically evaluated there. Is it helping the child to make that progress? Right? It's not fairness about, oh, one child got 9 and another got 10 or another got 8. That's not the fairness that we need to be bothered about here. Unfortunately, what the exam system driven by marks has done is that we are associating a fairness whether we gave 9 or 8 and whether that is fair. But actual fairness is measured as to whether we encourage or help the child to progress. Yeah. One quick additional thing. This was one of the first questions in the chat, whether it is all similar to what is there in IBS ATL, approaches to learning, which is true. A lot of ideas that have been explained in NEP and NCF, you will see links to IB as well, because IB is one of the very progressive curriculum that we have in curricula that we have in the world today. And so there are some links that you do see. For instance, NEP also looks at learning to learn as a very important aspect of what is it that we need to do in education. How do you learn to learn is a very important thing, and that, as you all know, is at the core of IB. Yeah. So I just wanted to bring that in, Ronita. Thank you. And I think we're almost half an hour out of time, so we should close.
Yeah. So thanks, Aanchal, Shilpi, and Rishi. And so going back to the same story, where I started from, the questions, whether we should have so many questions on Charles or Wellesley or James, or this angle is equal to that angle. But it's very important why two James are very different. That is where the competency lies, wherein you contextualize the periods or the people there, why certain angle is equal to certain angles. That kind of unraveling or unopening is competency based assessment, right? So so this discussion should go on, and as we all said, this is just a journey that we are embarking on. And this discussion should happen not only among the policymakers, but this discussion should continue happening among the teachers, among the teacher educators, inside the classroom, inside the staff room, so that we head towards a competency-based assessment. Thank you, everyone, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ronita, for moderating this enriching discussion that we had. And also thank you to the participants for joining us and asking some wonderful questions. So thank you all.
Mr. Just sorry to disturb you. I just have something to say, that we will be happy to share the educational material related to assessment, and we will also share the updates of our workshop and our programs which we conduct. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And also I would share the recording of the session in case you would like to share with your colleagues or friends. You can pass it over. Cool. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank
you,
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you.